21, Section 4. The title of it is Absolute Rulers of Russia. We'll start with Ivan the Terrible, work toward Peter the Great, and a lot of the changes that were made in Russia were designed to mimic these more modern Western European states. So to start, I want to talk about Ivan the Terrible. And Ivan the Terrible became king in Russia in 1533. He helped to rid Russia of Mongol rule. So he's kind of the first native Russian to rule after the Mongol era. When the Mongols started conquering everything in the late 1200s through the 1300s, Russia was under the control of the Mongol Empire for longer than anywhere else. And so when Ivan the Terrible seized power, declared himself the Tsar of Russia. It's really just the Russian name for Caesar. So he wanted to identify his system of government with the Roman model. He wanted to rid his country of Mongol rule. But he was in no way a democratic ruler. He ruled through terror. He turned against the landholding nobles. So we talked about the struggle of power between the nobility and the monarchy yesterday. Louis XIV's method was to require that the nobles live at the Palace of Versailles so he could control them directly through proximity. What did Ivan do? Killed them. Yes, he didn't like the landholding nobles. He didn't like the point that they were always trying to get away with things. So he just killed them. This earned him the name Ivan the Terrible. And he ruled through cruelty and through absolute power. His heir was actually really weak. And guess what? The nobles are going to make a comeback. Until in 1613, Michael Romanov and the Romanov family became the ruling czars of Russia, really up until the early 1900s. Next, we're going to talk about Peter the Great. Peter the Great became the Tsar, again the Russian term for Caesar, in 1696. He went to visit several countries in Western Europe. Spent some time in London, went to Paris. He met with world leaders from all over Western Europe. And he wanted Russia to mimic the culture, practices, and political systems of these more developed countries. He wanted to reform his country. He felt that Russia had been culturally isolated because of Mongol rule, was geographically cut off from Europe because of its distance from these large cities like Paris and London. And he also felt that while Russia is a huge country, the biggest country in the world, that creates some problems. You know, if you're on the far eastern side of Russia, you identify more culturally with these Asiatic nomads than you would, say, with Western Europeans. But he wanted to make his country culturally homogeneous, meaning culturally similar. And so when he went to visit these cities in Western Europe, there were many things that he was very attracted to. You know, he liked that people in Western Europe wore suits. The business people wore suits. He liked that they did not wear beards. He liked that they spoke a common language. He liked that many of the countries in Western Europe were part of the same religion. He said these are things that unify the people there. So he's going to take what he learned from his travels and attempt to use these reforms to westernize his country. Westernize means to use Western Europe as the model for change. So here's a few things he did. Number one, he put the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, which was the dominant faith in Russia, under state control. He reduced the power of the landowners. He didn't go as far as Ivan the Terrible in killing them, but he reduced their power to create a more centralized state instead of kind of feudal kingdoms. and then modernized the army. He actually hired Prussian military advisors to come to Russia to teach his men how to fight in the Western way. You see, when you watch movies of Napoleonic-style warfare, you've probably seen these classic examples of soldiers lining up and taking turns shooting at one another. It looks like the most ridiculous form of warfare, but it has a purpose. And for it to work, those soldiers have to be so highly trained and so disciplined they can take the shot and die without flinching. And someone can replace them, take the next shot and die without flinching. That requires a level of training and discipline that Peter the Great wanted in his country. No longer were battles won by, crazy berserkers, running with swords and hacking until they were hacked themselves. That's just not how modern warfare worked in the Napoleonic style. And so, he still had people who were riding horses and shooting arrows, but he wanted to teach his people to function in this disciplined way. Another major change was the introduction of potatoes into the Russian diet. So when Columbus discovered the Americas, he brought lots of gold back with him, but probably the most important thing he brought back with him was the potato. Yeah, probably the most important thing Columbus brought back was the potato. Why? Potatoes, daggone it, will grow anywhere. You could throw one out this window and it will have a potato plant in a few weeks. You could chop one up into 10 pieces, throw them out the window, you'll get 10 potato plants. It is one of the most versatile and stubbornly persistent crops that can yield abundant food. I mean, that's crazy. Chop one up, 10 pieces, fling them like frisbees, you have 10 potato plants. And they're really good, right? I mean, how many of us crave French fries? I mean, come on, all the time, right? Potatoes are a staple food here in the Americas, staple food in Europe. And so introducing potatoes is actually great because guess what? They're the first crop that farmers usually plant. Why? Because they can deal with these cold spells that we're getting. They can grow in a harsh climate. Ergo Russia. He started Russia's first newspaper, to disseminate information across a wide territory. Granted, it's a state-run newspaper, so you're not going to find editorials criticizing the government. But it's a form of mass communication. He raised the status of women to fit the European model. He adopted Western fashion. He started expecting people at court to dress in the Western way. Better shave your beard. Better wear a suit. Better wear a tie. It's a Western model. He wanted to act that way. And he began to set up schools all across Russia to teach these methods to hopefully modernize his country. If there was one thing that Peter the Great was obsessed with, it was a desire for a warm water port. When I think of Russia, I think, oh my gosh, it's probably freezing there still. I would assume there's snow on the ground in Moscow right now. It's a cold country. And you're certainly not getting boats out of the northern coast of Russia because that's the Arctic Circle. You're not launching boats out of Siberian cities. Why? Because it's ice. So where is Russia's navy? Well, it's mostly around the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, around St. Petersburg. So Peter wanted this warm water seaport to make travel to the west easier. He actually went to war with Sweden to gain this port along the Baltic Sea. And so he began building this grand city called St. Petersburg. Of course, he names it after himself. The city took years. Lots of people died in the process. I mean, it was his grand achievement, was the construction of this warm water port. And while he did all of these things through absolute rule, by the time of his death, Russia was a force to be reckoned with.